Hi, everyone. Oh, Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our high conflict, high emotion law practice CLE. This topic is extremely timely. For those of you that don't know, September is Suicide Prevention Month, which is a topic that is important for the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers community, as well as the legal community as a whole. Attorneys under 30 years old are twice as likely to experience suicidal ideation than attorneys who are over 40 years old. So it's super important for young lawyers, well, lawyers in general, but young lawyers especially, to pay attention to their mental health, especially because attorneys with job titles such as junior associate are more than twice as likely to attempt suicide than any other attorney with a different title. And as a legal community as a whole, we have approximately 8.5% of lawyers who have contemplated suicide, and that's just far too high for a profession. So if you are interested in learning more about those statistics, you can look at stressed, lonely, and overstimulated predictors of lawyer suicide risk, a study conducted by Patrick Krill and Hannah Thomas, and they published that on February 11th of 2023. So my name is Ashley Coughlin. I'm an attorney at O'Neill Wysocki, and I practice family law on a daily basis. And some of our panelists we have here today with you, we've got Mr. Mark Melton. Some of you may know him as the founder of the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center, or you might also know him in his other role as partner at Holland and Knight. He has also been listed on the Dallas 500 list since 2021, which recognizes the most powerful business leaders in all of North Texas. We also have Miss Whitney Kelch Green. She is a family law attorney and also a partner at Carrington Coleman. She has been recognized by the best lawyers in America for family law and collaborative law since 2020. And then last but not least, we have former Judge Robert Conyas, and he is currently serving as the senior attorney at the Dallas County Public Defender's Office. He is also a director of the Mexican American Bar Association and has been since 2019. He is also on the board of directors for the Dallas Bar Association, and we're super thankful to have him participating today. So now that you've had a little glimpse into who our panelists are, we're going to get started on the conversation. So the goal of today is just to give you some takeaways, some skills and tricks for coping, whether you're in a high conflict, high stress legal profession, or just practicing law in general. It's stressful, but the panelists today practice in specific areas of law that are known for being high conflict, high stress. So to get us started, Mark, why don't you start us off? But what would you have wanted to know if you were a young lawyer starting now, entering into your practice area?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I tell all young lawyers that work for me and that don't. I think when you're a young lawyer, especially, you have this tendency to be very concerned about how busy you are. And the most stressful times sometimes are the times when you have nothing to do, oddly enough. And I think a lot of young lawyers make the mistake of sitting there and stressing out in those lulls in your practice. And so when my associates come to me and say, I don't have anything to do and I'm worried about it, I tell them to go to the golf course, leave the office, go do something else for a couple hours and try and enjoy those lulls because they're few and far between. And when they do happen, you got to learn to smell the roses while they're there.
Thank you, Mark. And Judge Conness, what would you advise for people going into the public defense sector?
Well, I think what I would have wanted to know is that, the practice of law can quickly completely absorb your life, and it can and your self-identity can be quickly wrapped up into your identity as a lawyer, and you begin to lose your identity in all the other things that you are, whether it's a spouse or a partner, or father, brother, all your family relationships, all your friendships, but all the other things that you might be into, your hobbies and things of that nature. I mean, I'm really glad that you were doing this month because, suicide amongst lawyers is a big deal. I've known 4 lawyers who've practiced criminal law who've, committed suicide over the last 15 years or so. So it's not a joke. But looking back, I think and especially like on the criminal side, whether you're a prosecutor or defense attorney, you start to get wrapped up in like how many cases you won or what kind of, if you've worked on big cases and things of that nature. And if you tie your self-identity to those kind of metrics, and that doesn't work out for you because you think you ought to be winning all your cases or a certain percentage or whatever, then I feel like it can have negative effects on on yourself. And so just knowing that you, as a young lawyer, I just want to make sure that I would have wanted to know, and I think I've come to know, you're more than your law degree.
And Whitney, what would you like to share? What would you have wanted to know as a young lawyer entering the family law world?
So this kind of piggybacks on what Judge Cañas was saying, which is, be okay with building some boundaries for yourself. I think that you have to realize that at the end of the day, yes, this is a job. Yes, this is a service profession, but you have to have personal and professional boundaries. In family law, it was really easy for me to allow those boundaries to bleed together, especially at the beginning. I noticed myself giving my clients my cell phone, and I would just work around the clock. And so there was never really any separation from work or home. And for me, I wish that I had known that it was okay to build in that separation. Of course, emergencies happen. And of course, as a young associate, you're going to have to hop on and do things at hours when maybe you would prefer not to. But at the end of the day, I think making a habit of having set office hours, even if you're working remotely, versus set personal hours, and then making working outside of that the exception as opposed to the rule, really helps kind of set the stage for a healthier balance and a healthier life overall.
Thank you. And Judge, I wanted to come back on something that you said. You said it's really easy to lose your identity. Do you have any tips or tricks for how do you stay grounded? How do you keep your identity to something that's more than just your role as a lawyer?
Well, yeah, I think a big part of that is you've kind of have to do a little self-reflection and kind of get to know who you are as a person too, right? And so, and that's tough. And we're talking about like, touchy-feely things, but it's important, right? And so I think, like for myself, um, I know what my triggers are at work. Like I know when I'm beginning to get stressed out or when I'm letting work take over a little too much. And so it took time to develop that. I'm not saying it was something I walked into the profession with by any stretch of the imagination, but once I started to identify those, then I knew, okay, I need to take a step back, or I need to go talk to someone who will hear me out. I need to go have a beer with a friend or whatever. But and so like for myself, like if I'm feeling stressed, I know, okay, what really stressed for me is like going a super hard workout. I mean, just go do it, get on the treadmill and go for 30 minutes as fast as I can go. And make sure I get some good sleep that night. And that really helps.
Thank you for sharing. And so knowing those things and moving on, who do you rely on when you are maybe experiencing those triggers? Who do you rely on when you're stressed or overwhelmed? I'm going to go back to Mark on this one.
Well, I mean, for me, it's my wife. And so I think it's going to be a different person for different people. And, I also have, Ross Williams over at Bell Dunley is my best friend. And we certainly get together at the house and share a glass of whiskey from time to time and commiserate about all of the stressful things that are going on. And so it certainly is helpful to talk about it, whether it's, with a professional or just with friends and family. just to get it off your chest a little bit. So that certainly does help. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the things that are stressing you are going to keep stressing you out until you get rid of them. And so there's got to be some kind of action plan to move things forward and to remove those stressors from your life in that moment. And these things change, right? It ebbs and flows. And I think part of the problem with high stress positions is it's easy enough sometimes to identify what those stressors are. But occasionally, or maybe for some people often, it creates this paralysis where you just sit there and stew over the list of things that are stressing you out and you don't do any of them. And then they just continue to stress you out and the problem grows and it becomes more problematic. And, for me, in my older age, I've learned in those moments to stop and just put everything down and go take a nap. If you can get 20 minutes and just calm your brain down and then come back and just pick the shortest thing on the list, the easiest one to knock off, and then just try and get that one done and ignore the rest of the list. And you kind of start to make some progress and that makes you feel better. And then you get to the next one and you can kind of get out of the spiral. But that paralysis is the biggest hurdle to overcome.
I'm definitely a list maker as well, so I can relate to that tactic. Whitney, what about you? Who do you go to? Mark goes to his wife and best friend. Is it similar for you? Do you have different resources that you use?
So definitely I will go to my husband, my friends, other young lawyers in the community who, are either practicing the same area of law or that I know are also in stressful positions. But honestly, the number one person that I rely on when I'm feeling really stressed or really anxious about anything is my counselor. And I think that that's another thing to really plug in, that I wish I had known as a young lawyer, that it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to get professionals involved. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're a poor lawyer. It doesn't mean that you can't handle it. In fact, it means that you're taking the problem at face value and that you're solving it. And that's what we do as lawyers. We solve problems. So why wouldn't we solve problems for ourselves? And why wouldn't we rely on other professionals, just like we do in our litigation or our transactional work? We rely on professionals every day to help us with our cases. And so I also rely on professionals to help me with my mental health. And I do feel that having that outlet of a professional counselor to talk through things and to help me develop coping mechanisms is really, really, really beneficial. And it makes me, honestly, not just a more productive person, but a more productive attorney. It definitely bleeds over in a positive way to my professional life.
Thank you, Whitney. And Judge, what about you? Who do you turn to?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mark said. You got to have a good buddy. You got to have a good partner. I totally agree with what you just said, because I have a counselor too, and just to get like that stamp of good health, right? When your counselor says, hey, you're doing great. We have somebody for our teeth, we have somebody for our body. Why not have somebody for our mind, right? And if you're so inclined for your spirit too. I think just maybe add on a little bit to what I said earlier. I mean, it's okay to also, know yourself as a person that you can go to and just say, okay, I know identify ways that I can, for myself, if there's nobody else around, that I can relieve this stress. I can feel better about it. Like Mark's example of like, hey, just go play golf. It's okay to take a couple of hours off from work to go do that. I mean, because Whitney's right. I mean, sometimes you get called in the weekend. Sometimes you have to work into the evening. So it's okay if you take a 2 or 3 hour lunch if you can from time to time, right? Take a little mental break. There's no problem with that. Like for myself, I always give myself sometimes rewards. Like if I just got out of a big stressful trial, I tell myself while I'm in the trial, kind of stressing out, hey, there's a movie you want to go see. I always would take myself to a movie. But if that trial ended at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm not back in my office working. I'm going to the movie because I told myself that's what I was going to do. And that was my reward. So I think listening to yourself is a big deal, and you can use yourself to relieve your own stress sometimes.
Thanks, Judge. I've noticed that some of you have put questions in the Q&A box. I have allotted a certain amount of time at the end, so I'm not ignoring those. We will come back to your questions, and if they seem like they relate to this specific topic, I'll make sure to throw them into the panelists. That said, I do want to ask, with you guys working in these harder, not necessarily harder mentally, but emotional areas of law, what's the hardest part about working in your area of law? Whitney, you're in family. Judge, you're working in the criminal world, and Mark, you're in the eviction world with the advocacy, but you also do tax. So Whitney, if you could start us off with that one.
Sure. So I would say that the hardest part of my area of law, just globally speaking, are the clients, that they come to you during the worst period of their lives. They could be the best people in the world, but they are going through the worst thing that they've experienced up until this point, presumably, regardless of whether it's divorce or child issues. And so I think that the hardest part for me, especially starting out as a young lawyer, was compartmentalizing that, learning that I didn't have to take on my clients' cases emotionally myself, that I could still help them and be a good advocate for them, not just through the litigation process, but also emotionally supporting them and learning how to not take it home with me. Just kind of like Judge Kanya said, that takes time. It takes time and it takes practice. And so you have to be kind to yourself, that of course there's going to be a case that you take home and you think about, but really, really try to be intentional about compartmentalizing it and reminding yourself that you're not a magician. These people or their families have been through trauma, and you can't change that. You can't go back in time and undo what's already been done. So really focus on moving forward. That was always the hardest part for me, is I wanted to fix everything. How can I fix it? How can I fix it now? And really taking those cases on personally. And that really created a huge amount of anxiety and emotional stress for me. And so I think that by learning how to compartmentalize and really separating your life from your client's life and your obligations legally and professionally from their own kind of personal obligations is the best way to manage that.
Thank you, Whitney. Judge, how about you? What's the hardest part of working in the criminal world?
Yeah, a lot of it is very similar to what Whitney just said. I mean, you're dealing with people who are like in really, really bad straits. I mean, and that's why they've come to you, because they really need your help. So there's definitely that part. And along with the criminal law aspect and family, you guys see it too. I mean, you see when people do bad things to other people, right? Whether it's sexual assaults, murders, child abuse. I'm getting ready for a trial on a child abuse case next month. And, you have to go through photos, you have to go through testimony, you have to go through reports, and you can't unsee some things, you can't unhear some things. And you as the attorney take on that secondary trauma. And so you have to be able to find a way to release that through some of the techniques that we've talked about. Like, you got to have a good partner in life, a spouse, business partner, friend, who maybe if they don't do something similar to what you do, then hopefully they can at least be a good ear and a good person to just say, hey, I feel you. And with criminal defense, well, with all lawyers, we try not to take on our clients' problems, and we try to set those boundaries, but at the same time, we're like, I do this to myself. I'll look in the mirror. It's like, I'm the only person standing between my client and a life sentence, right? And even though I can then say to myself, well, look, I didn't put him in that position. He put himself in that position, or whatever. It's still like, I've got to do a really good job to make sure that at least everything that can legally be done is done, right? And then that calls into your level of competency and how secure you feel in this area of law, and so on and so on. So, that's the hardest part, is dealing with all that. And yeah, it can take a toll. There's no doubt.
Thank you. Mark, anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, I'm not good at this part. So intellectually, I certainly understand the idea that you have to compartmentalize, and that's true. You have to do that. Where I really kind of struggle with it is kind of what Judge Kanye said, where this person really is depending on you, and there's not a line of other people standing there to take over if you decide to take a break and quit. And so I have long thought, if I'm to be the best advocate that I can be for people that are truly in need, you kind of have to, on some level, take it on as a personal chore. And if you're going to do that, then how do you compartmentalize it? And I think that's a really tough thing to do. Especially when we started the eviction work, through COVID, everything was an emergency, everything had to be done now. And there was an unlimited number of people that were, asking for help. And it led to a lot of long days and nights. And, one of my outlets for it really was social media, which some of you may have seen over the years, where I would just post whatever happened that day. And sometimes it was, picking just one of the worst stories of the day. But it was a little therapeutic. But, even through those times, I mean, I still found myself, in a dark room in my house every day, in tears, just, really struggling with the stress and the emotional issues that come with doing that. And like when you said, you're dealing with people that are having the worst day of their life. And then as soon as you're done with them, you hang up and you call the next person who's also having the worst day of their life. And it does compound. And I did spend about 6 months going to see a therapist once or twice a week. And it did help. I'm not sure I understand the science of exactly how that worked, but it did. And, I still go back for a check-in every now and then, as I think I need it. And so, it is tough, and you've got to find that line. And I do find myself, the further I get into this, not answering the phone. At this point, if I don't know who the person is on the caller ID, I do not answer it, period. I don't care who it might be. It's not getting answered. They can leave a voicemail and I'll decide whether to call them back. And so those are just some of the boundaries that I've set, or I'll put my phone down, after 10 o'clock or something at night, and just go, I'm not answering, even if I do know who it is. And so but it's tough, and you got to make a personal decision on how involved you want to be with your clients, and how much you want to disassociate from those different types of things as you're moving forward.
Right. So, Judge.
And I just wanted to add
Go
one
ahead,
more
Whitney.
thing, Ashley. I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
forgot to mention. I think that another really hard thing about litigation in general, and I'm not sure if Judge Kanyas or if Mark sees this in their practice as much, but I know in family law, there has definitely been just a very big uptick, in my opinion, on lack of professionalism with opposing counsel. You just see a lot of unnecessary, you just see a lot of unnecessary fighting, a lot of unnecessary commentary, when we should all just be professionally courteous to each other. We all have hard jobs, and it is stressful, and we can talk about, how to deal with that too. But at the end of the day, I know for me personally, especially as a young lawyer, dealing with opposing counsels was a huge trigger for me, especially ones that, were demeaning or who were unnecessarily rude. And so I just think it's really important that we all give each other a lot of grace, that we don't know what each other is dealing with at the end of the day, and that we can all do our jobs professionally and be kind to each other.
That's a good tidbit. I can relate on a little bit on that part. So y'all have touched on it a little bit with the boundaries and Judge going and running his hardest for 30 minutes, but self-care and moving past what some people refer to as compassion fatigue or the secondary trauma. Other than getting on the treadmill, maybe talking to your therapist, Whitney, do you have any strategies that have worked for you or that you've seen work for other lawyers?
So I think that when I really get into compassion fatigue, whether it's a specific case or whether it's all of my cases, I really notice that talking to a colleague that's in my same practice area about it helps, and trying to remind myself how much I've done and how much I've really tried for this person to give them the best outcome possible. Sometimes looking back on past successes can be really comforting in family cases, and reminding yourself, oh, the court got it right this time. And sometimes the court doesn't always get it right from your perspective or a global perspective. But at the end of the day, if you can look back and know that you did everything that you could to help your client, to help their child, I think that you should be able to put your head down easy at night. And so sometimes just talking with colleagues and reminding yourself and talking about your war stories, if you will, can be helpful for that.
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah, I got to follow up to that.
go ahead.
This is again, this is a tough issue, right? Because you got to set boundaries, sure, and I think you've got to put this in the proper context and really be honest with yourself about what you're doing. There's a lot of people that will say, I can't do anymore, or I can't do that. And that's not true, right? The real answer is you can always do more. You can always take one more phone call. You can always do one more email. You can always take one more case. So it's you're lying to yourself if you take that position. The real answer is I won't do more. You're making a conscious choice, right? And a lot of these cases, that choice is I've got to step away for my own mental health, and I understand that the consequence of this is that person is going to drown. And those are real consequences, right? When you decide to step away, there is a consequence to another person. And you've got to get comfortable with that, but don't lie to yourself and just say, I can't do it anymore. And so therefore I'm not worried about it. I think when you have that honest conversation, it does actually get a little easier to deal with, because you made a choice, and you're not lying to yourself and everybody else around you. And there's something about that personal honesty that allows you to draw some lines and take care of yourself a little bit better. And by the way, I'm no paragon of self-care. And so I am not standing up on a soapbox here telling you how to be successful at this. I'm sharing my own struggles with it because I am not that good at it myself.
Thank you, Mark. Judge, what about you? Other than the treadmill, you have any other strategies?
Well, I think, and building off what Mark just said, I think that level of honesty is really, really important for self-care. I mean, you've got to, you just got to be honest with yourself at all levels. Like, am I in the right practice of law? I started off at a big firm right out of law school, and pretty much immediately realized that big firm life was not going to be the practice that I wanted. And so, got out of that, and I knew I wanted to be in the courtroom, went and started doing criminal law, and haven't turned back, and I loved it ever since. But yeah, that also meant that my paycheck got smaller and all these other consequences, right? But I wouldn't have traded it for the world. And so just being honest, at that level is beginning of your self-care, because like Mark just said, you have to then start, once you start getting successful, start placing those limits, and realizing that there are those kind of consequences to your decisions, both to yourself and to maybe potential clients or current clients. And we do like dog rescue. And every time you go and get a dog out of the pound, you're leaving 10 behind, right? And so, but the way we kind of deal with that, and the way I try to deal with it in my profession, is really take stock of your successes. Like, okay, yeah, there are 3 clients whose call I didn't take today, but I did take this guy's call, and I got him this, and this, and he, now he's in a much better legal position, or he's in a much better place in life. And just really, really pay attention to your successes too. Don't let those go into your file. Don't just put the file away in the cabinet and forget about it. It's okay to say, hey, I really helped this person today. And and take a victory lap for yourself, because that'll help the next time when either you're feeling bad, like, man, I can't be the super lawyer for that call, for that client. I can't help that client, or I won't help that client. That's those, it's those types of things. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, Judge. So that said, we've talked a little bit about having to be honest with yourself, boundaries. Another aspect of working in any area of law is we all make mistakes. How do you accept the fact that you've made a mistake and move forward, practice self-forgiveness? How do you move on from that point? Whitney or Judge, either one of you could start this one.
Yeah, first off, I really thought about this when you put it up on the outline, because first off, I realized that I know myself, and I'm going to go through a lot of kicking myself in the butt, a lot of it, right? I'm going to do a lot of reflection, a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, whatever you want to say, and I just have to do it. I just have to get through it. I have to beat myself up a little bit. I know I'm not going to sleep well that night, whatever. But for me, and I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I know tomorrow is coming, and I know I know it will be better tomorrow. And more importantly, I'll be a better lawyer tomorrow, because I went through that mistake. I'm not going to repeat it. I got better. I'm going to get better. If it's an area of law, it's like I'm going to looking for the next CLE on that particular law. I'm reading a law article, whatever. I'm going to be a better lawyer because I made that mistake, and I'm not going to make the same mistake again. And that really, really helps.
Whitney, what about you? How do you move on from knowing you've made a mistake, but knowing that it's not the end of the world?
So I think first you just have to own it and realize that almost any mistake is fixable once you acknowledge it and talk to either a friend, a colleague, a superior about how to fix it and just address it and really, really focus on moving forward. I, like Judge Kanyas, will also beat myself up if I'm like, I cannot believe I missed this deadline, or, oh, I can't believe I told this client I'd call him back and I didn't. And I'll really absorb a lot of that personally. And then at the end of the day, I just have to remember that it's about moving forward. That if you can find a solution, and if you can put that solution in action, that's going to start to fix the mistake itself, and it's going to fix the problem itself. And then you can focus on just not doing the same thing again. I think that if you get wrapped up in this downward spiral of beating yourself up, and if you let it go on too long, that then it can just really become a vicious cycle. And so I almost set a time limit for myself. Okay, here's my pity party. I can be upset, and then tomorrow's a new day. It's time to put the solution into effect and move forward, because I can't change what's already happened. I can only control what happens moving forward.
Thank you. I like the time limit thing. That's one of the things my boss will tell me. He's like, you can go cry, have your Dr. Pepper, but tomorrow we're going to do it again, and it's going to be a better day, and you're going to move forward and help people.
Yep.
So, Mark, what about you? Any tips for moving past mistakes?
No, not really. I mean, to be honest, this is one of the things that I don't suffer this affliction, and so I don't really have any advice. My just default position when something bad happens is just to assess exactly where I'm at and where I need to be and how to get there. So I waste no time with pity parties or anything like that. It's just straight to the next step.
Well, hey, I'm sure that there's some people in the audience who are like you, and they just ready to analyze how we move forward. So appreciate that insight as well. Now, another thing, we've talked about all the hard parts, but why do you stay in this type of law? Mark, you can start on this one. What makes you stay in eviction work?
Well, I've thought a lot about that one. There have been a lot of times that I've thought, do I really want to keep doing this? It's a lot. It's a lot of pressure. And I guess the reason is because no one else would do it. So there's not a line of people standing there just ready to take over if I quit. And at this point, I also have, a staff of 17 people at the Dallas Vision Advocacy Center. I'm kind of responsible for all of their families' livelihoods, and I've got to make sure I raise enough money to pay them all, and that they're trained and happy and healthy, and that they have all the things that they need. But more importantly, there's just such a huge need out there for this, right? People are getting evicted, usually illegally. And so I just can't bring myself to quit, even though I want to. And a lot of people have told me, you've done enough. I mean, we've helped 30 or 35,000 families over the last 4 years at this point. It's a fairly significant legacy type of an issue, but I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that. I think about the next 35,000 families that are going to need that service that would just vanish if I decided to stop. And and I often have this thought, it sure would be easy to just retreat into my privilege, because I don't have these problems, and I can just go sit in my house and be a rich white man for the rest of my days and live a very nice, happy, quiet life. But I don't have that in me, I guess. So we're going to keep going, and maybe one day I'll drop dead too early because I did too much. I don't know, but whatever it is, we're only here for a blink of an eye. So that it just is what it is.
I know I speak for a lot of members of the Dallas community, but we're very appreciative of the work that you're doing, Mark. Judge, what about you? Why do you stay and keep doing your line of work?
Because I love it. I can't imagine doing another area of law. I was joking around with somebody the other day. I was like, if someone said, "Hey, we want to hire you for your legal abilities, but you have to sit in an office all day long for 8 hours, but we'll pay you 5 times what you're making now," I would say no. I would say no. I love that in criminal law, every day is different. Every case has its own unique challenges. I love that I'm constantly on the move. I'm in different courts in front of different judges, dealing with different prosecutors. Every single day is different. Every case is different. It generally, in Dallas, the criminal bar is kind of a small one, and so we're tight, and usually there are only a couple of jerks, knock on wood, but for the most part, it's pretty collegial, so that also helps with the atmosphere. So yeah, I just love what I do, and it's always nice. You can always, it's easy to maybe focus on the mistakes like we were just talking about, but it's also nice when you get that kudos from the client. It's not what you do it for. These people are coming to you for help, and you can just self-reflect and say, I know I helped them, and feel good just based on that. But it's really nice when the client every once in a while will say, not only thank you, but hey, can I hire you? As a public defender, I can't work for people. I can't be hired. So when people say, "Hey, I'll give you some money if you'll come help me on my Collin County case," it's always a good feeling when clients say things like that. So, but yeah, I love it.
And Whitney, I'm sure there's some overlap there, but what about you? Why do you stay in family law? What keeps you going?
So I also love it. And it took me some time to figure out what I really did love about it, because it was so emotionally taxing. And I think for me, at the end of the day, being a child myself of divorced parents, I really love being able to solve cases creatively, even outside the litigation process. What I've noticed is sometimes you have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off, open up the wound through litigation, but then you get to heal, and getting to see kind of these families heal when they're able to do that, whether it's through mediation, parenting facilitation, whatever different processes we have, and see both parents put their best foot forward for their kids. that is the most rewarding thing at the end of my day. And I know that that's kind of warm and fuzzy, but that is one of those wins that I'll hold on to, is if I can look back at a case that was just a mess when it came to me and was super high conflict, but somehow the other side and I, the opposing counsel and I, were able to find an agreement and get these parties back on track to being the best parents for their kids. That's something that really, really keeps me going. And I think that just kind of goes back to remind yourself of the wins. Those kind of things are my wins. And, you know, other wins can be a client just thanking you for helping them through a difficult process, or even helping them to see maybe what they were doing wrong. Because a big part of our jobs as lawyers is to tell our clients, you know, listen, this is what you should not be doing. Here are the mistakes you've made in the past. Stop doing that. And being able to kind of develop that confidence as you practice and tell your clients, listen, I've seen this happen. This is how this judge responds to XYZ. Stop it. And hopefully that's making not just their world better in, you know, mitigating conflict for them, but also the trickle down effect of their children, their future partners, things like that. And so I really love the conflict resolution side of what we do, and that keeps me going, is being able to see that there are success stories and that we are making a difference rather than just kind of fanning the flames of conflict.
Thank you, Whitney. Yeah, for me, I keep the emails that are nice and the clients are super thankful and grateful. It's nice to have a tangible thing of seeing, oh, like, here are the people I've helped, and here's my why in a tangible form. And so I can relate to you in the being able to solve conflicts and being reminded why.
I've often said that I need to create like a wall in the firm, that we need to just have like an appreciation wall that different attorneys can go and see, you know, for different sections. Because I agree, I think having that tangible reminder is super helpful whenever you're having an off moment.
So on that note, something we've talked about, and it looks like someone in the audience is curious about, is we've talked about setting boundaries. So you might be setting those internally for yourself of, hey, I'm not going to check my phone after 9 p.m. or things like that. But our audience member is curious on, how do you communicate your boundaries if you have a more difficult relationship with your supervisors? How do you talk about that with your higher ups?
Well, maybe I'll start with that one.
Okay,
I
thanks,
hire
Mark.
a big law firm, so you know, I think one of the most important things is, especially as a young lawyer, if you're getting your job done and you're posting your hours like you're supposed to do, you're going to get a whole lot more leeway than if you don't, right? So if I've got, you know, some young lawyer that works for me and they're billing 1,000 hours a year, or on pace for something like that, and they tell me they can't, they're too busy, and I mean, that's an indication of a deeper problem than just a momentary stressor. For my associates that are just performing where they're supposed to be or higher, you know, when they come to me and say, and there's one guy in particular that comes to mind when I say this, he'll come to me and say, yeah, I'm just really feeling stressed and I just can't do it. And I'll grab him by the back of the shirt and drag him down to the bar downstairs and, you know, buy him a drink and say, we're just going to relax. So you're going to go home and go play with your baby, and I'll cover you for the evening, and let's get back at it tomorrow. But you know, it does make a difference whether you are performing at a normal level, because everyone understands that at some point you're going to need to take some personal time or a break and get away from it. Even the biggest asshole of a partner that you could ever work for understands that at some level. And as long as you're performing on the whole, you should most of the time be able to set those boundaries. I wouldn't go in and make demands and say, here's what's going to happen, boss. But, you know, just to kindly say, look, I really just need a few hours off for a day or two or even a week, whatever it is. You know, most people are going to give you that grace.
Thanks, Mark. Judge, what about you? Any tips?
Yeah, I would think to be, two things, I guess, maybe to be professional about it, like Mark said, if you're setting, if you've already set a reputation in the firm that, hey, you will take care of your business, then that's a big step. And that gives you the credibility to then say, hey, I'm also, but because I take care of my business, I can, when I place these limits, I know that means you should know that I'm taking, I've taken into account all the things that still need to be done. Now, having said that, I supervise some lawyers here, and communication is big, right? And so it's like, I don't require them to come and ask permission to take a day off or whatever, but it's always about like understanding what your supervisor might need. And if you can address that, even knowing you're, in some way saying this boundary will not interfere with that expectation, whether it's, hey, you can all, if it's like, hey, if you have a question about this case, you don't just have to ask me. There's either my paralegal or maybe another lawyer in the firm who's equally up to speed or whatever, something along those lines. Give them an out so that way they feel like when they get that email from you saying, hey, I really need some time, I'm taking the rest of the night off, and they're going like, well, what the hell? Now you've given them a tool to say, oh, okay, well, I can't, Kanyas is out for the night. I'm going to give him that night. I'll go. This is, if I need some info, I'll go here. Something like that. Maybe just understanding your supervisor's expectations a little bit and trying to meet them.
Communication, being professional, all good tips. Whitney, what about you? You're now in the partner role at Carrington Coleman. Any tips?
So I definitely agree with what Mark and Judge Kanya said as far as communication, and then also your past performance is going to be indicative on how much leeway you're given. And so if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing as a lawyer and getting your hours posted and submitting your time and meeting deadlines, things like that, I think that it's absolutely reasonable to be able to communicate with your supervisor, hey, listen, I really need to take XYZ time off, or, oh, I really need, this day to go do something. I don't think that the vast majority of partners, as long as it's, not a date that you're in trial, are going to have a problem with that. And I think that it's also about you setting your own boundaries. So for example, when I was a young lawyer, I got into a really bad habit of checking my emails right before bed and answering my emails before bed. And so I would set this expectation that I was working around the clock, and I created that expectation. And it's really hard to kind of step back over that line once you've already crossed it. And so I think, really try hard to have, your set of working hours, and don't over commit yourself. Also, as far as the communication goes, a lot of times I try to tell my associates what my deadlines are. Like, hey, get me this draft by X date. So as an associate, I think that it's really, really helpful if your supervisor doesn't already do that you ask for it, that you say, hey, when do you need this by? Hey, do you have an example of this? Just things that can make your life easier, because you're already kind of automatically setting those boundaries by requesting a due date, because then the partner shouldn't be coming to you 2 days sooner and saying, where's this draft? And so you're kind of building in that cushion for yourself by asking for a practical deadline up front.
I think that's really, really key, because I'm actually did that this week to the people who supervise me. And like, I'm going on a 3-day weekend this weekend, and I do not want to be bothered. And so, my immediate supervisor asked me for some information, and I said, when would you like that? And we had this meeting on Monday. When would you like the information? And she said, well, can you get it to me by the end of the week? I said, I'll get it to you by Thursday evening. Right. And so, but just asking that question, setting that expectation, that communication can really save you ahead of time, and maybe anticipating and make sure you've maybe at least kept the fires small that might pop up if it's a short, like 3-day weekend. Hopefully keep your fingers crossed. No judge is calling on a Friday afternoon, but yeah.
It's funny, Whitney, as you said, you talked about answering emails right before bed and setting expectations. When I was a young lawyer, I would type out my emails in the early evening, and then I would wait to hit send until after midnight. just to intentionally create that, the look like I was really working all night, even though I was not. Usually I was at the bar having a beer, but I'd take my laptop so I could hit send before I left. But I do think that, we've kind of talked about solutions for, one-off issues, right? Where you're just having a bad day or a bad week. I think you also need to reflect enough to understand if you're just in the wrong place. There, it's not for everybody. Not everybody should be practicing law in a high emotion area or at a big law firm with crazy expectations or whatever those things are. And you need to really be honest with yourself and reflect on, is this for you? Do you have the mental fortitude and the emotional fortitude to deal with some of those high pressure jobs? And maybe you do, and maybe you don't, and that's okay. But if you don't, then don't put yourself in a position where you're really just kind of dooming yourself to failure, because there might be another job out there that you would be a huge success at. So really think about that.
Thanks. And for those of you that haven't noticed, Sherry just put the CLE code in the chat, so you are welcome to write that down to get credit for today. It looks like we have one more question, and I hope I'm interpreting this question in the right way, but essentially part of lawyers in general, young, older, mid-career attorneys, is the court system. There's some stress there. This audience member wants to know what type of ethical responsibilities judges have to consider with the mental health of attorneys practicing in their courts. So the way I'm looking at this is, if they notice that an attorney is struggling, are you aware of any obligations that judges have, or even maybe as opposing counsel on a case, that we have to report, or even just keep an eye out for that other attorney who may be struggling?
Well, I mean, I'm sure Judge Conius has some experience in that directly.
Yes, Judge, I know you've been on the bench before,
Right.
so you might have some insight here.
Yeah, judges definitely have the same ethical obligations that all lawyers do. If you feel like you've encountered a lawyer who, for no fault of their own, maybe can't do the job right then and there, whether it's a substance abuse addiction, whether it's just they're older and maybe their mind is not as sharp as it needs to be in a high pressure situation. And it's really, really hard first to even acknowledge it, because we're all kind of embarrassed to maybe have that conversation with somebody, or to say that I think of this of you, and you want to think good of people, and you want to trust that people can self-identify, but the truth is that they often can't. And so it does take someone from the outside to, if you can, say, hey buddy, hey, let's talk for a second, or what have you. But thankfully the state bar, at least has the hotline. I guess it's the TLAP hotline, where you can call and just say, hey, I've had this experience with this lawyer, and they'll take it from there. So kind of, I don't know what the right word would be, but at least you've done your part in that sense. For judges in particular, I guess if you are, if you do also, I guess, have the responsibility to watch out for the party that lawyer is representing, at some level, because you do have to kind of respect the due process, certainly on a constitutional level for criminal, but also the civil procedure aspect. You don't want any party to walk into your courtroom with an unfair advantage, sort of thing. So I hope that kind of addresses the.
Well, let me make a comment on that, because Judge Conius was a good judge. And not all of them are. And it's not a small percentage of them that are not good judges. It's a pretty big percentage. And I think the question is really getting at, the last line of it, right? Should we have higher expectations of judges that are really just abusing litigants and lawyers in the courtroom? And the answer is, you should absolutely have higher expectations of those people. They're not gods, even though some of them think that they are. And you know, there is recourse. I mean, it's all politics at the end of the day, right? Everyone's afraid of pissing off the judge because what are they going to do to me? Is it going to make my boss mad if I piss off the judge? Right? Those are real concerns to think about. Um, you know, I find myself often in the enviable position of just not caring about that most of the time. But that probably comes with, you know, age and stature. And so, you know, but I just this year filed an ethics complaint against the sitting judge with the ethics commission because she's a horrible judge and she should be absolutely removed from the bench as soon as possible. And there are a lot of those, but it's an electoral process. The judges are, you know, elected by the voters. They're beholden to absolutely no one. They are sovereigns in their own right. And so it's a tough place to be, but you know, just remember they're the ones being the asshole, not you. So don't take it too personal.
Thanks, Mark. That's helpful. And what Judge was talking about, that kind of ties into my wrap up plug of TLAP. I did just put in the chat the hyperlink to their website. You can call or text their number 1-800-343-TLAP. Their website contains support groups, resources, self-assessment quizzes, lots of resources. And one of the things that's unique about TLAP is that they really focus on the anonymity of their callers and people who are reaching out. They don't have a database of who's calling. So whether you're calling for help yourself or calling because you're concerned maybe for another attorney, or they also help with paralegals, judges, law students, which is nice. So it's not just an attorney resource, it's the legal community as a whole resource. So they're a great resource. I try to plug them wherever I can. They also have access to the Sharon Crowley Trust, which is available to help Texas lawyers, law students, and judges who are unable to afford the mental health treatment that they need. And one of the requirements for applying for trust resources is to be using the resources from TLAP. So why not use TLAP? If you're going to need some help paying for it, then consider the Sharon Crowley Trust. Once again, I really want to thank y'all for coming out and joining us. If you do have further questions, please feel free to shoot me an email at ashley@owlawyers.com, and I can make sure that someone gets you an answer on that. If you are interested in joining the Wellness Committee, we are having a get-together at Chewy's on McKinney Avenue on October 2nd. I believe it's 6 p.m. if you are interested in hanging out with us and working on your wellness there as well. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having us.